right, good morning. Welcome to our Encouraging Truth series. We're very glad you're joining us today. First, if you don't know anything about our ministry, you want to know more, you can go online to womensbiblestudy.com. There you can learn everything you want to know about us. We started this particular series because we want every Monday morning for you to wake up and be encouraged with something biblical for the week. So today I want to encourage you with this thought. Encouraging truth number 52 is this: you don't have to manipulate, you can trust God to take care of it. Now, I'm going to give you an illustration of what that looks like. This is kind of a funny one, but a man and a woman are both involved in a car accident, and it's a really, really bad accident, but they both get out and they make it out alive. But after they crawl out of their cars, the woman says, I can't believe this happened. And the man's like, I know, I can't really believe that we weren't hurt with all of this crazy accident that just happened. The woman says, I think this is a miracle. And she said, I had this bottle of wine that was in my car and it didn't break. To me, that's even more miraculous. That just must mean that God wants us to be friends. So she opens the bottle of wine and she hands it to the man, and he says, she says, have a drink of wine. We'll celebrate us not being hurt in this accident. So he takes a sip and then she puts the cap back on, and the man says, aren't you having any wine? And she says, no, I think I'll just wait until after the police arrive. Because there you go. That's manipulation. Manipulate is this. Manipulate is to control something or someone to your advantage, often unfairly or dishonestly. But sometimes we manipulate because we're afraid of something. We don't think that God actually can take care of it, so we need to feel like we have to manipulate to make something happen. But here's what we're going to learn today is in the long run, that never works out, which is what we're going to learn from our story today. So today I want us to meet Isaac and Rebekah. It's this beautiful love story in the Bible. And we know that Isaac is the precious son of Abraham and Sarah. And whenever you hear, whenever you read the Bible or you hear people say, they'll say, I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this is that particular Isaac. But today we're going to see the bitter consequences of somebody manipulating people and circumstances for their own good. And everything would have been different had they just prayed and trusted God to do what they couldn't do. So let's start with Isaac and Rebekah. They wanted a baby really, really bad. And so they prayed and prayed and prayed. And she finally gets pregnant. But her pregnancy is really, really difficult. And she doesn't know what that's all about. So she asks God, she prays. And Genesis 25:22 tells us what's going on. It says, but the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So she went to ask the Lord why is this happening to me? And the Lord says, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. So what we see is Rebekah is pregnant with twins, and that's why she's like so confused, because they're just all jumbling, and she's just not feeling good most of the time. But God makes a really, really important point, that in that culture, the older one was always the one, the younger always served the older. But God made it clear before these kids were even born that the older son would serve the younger son. And what that meant was the younger son would end up getting the birthright, because the birthright meant that they get twice as much as the younger sons, because it would be the older son's responsibility to take care of the parents. So they always got more money. But the birthright and everything would go to the younger son, which we know as Jacob. Verse 24 says this: and when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat, so they named him Esau. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. As the boys grew, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau, now remember that, because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. In other words, Isaac, who should have cared more about the things of God, his descendants, his godly heritage being passed on to future generations, instead, he just loved Esau because Esau could provide him food. So what we learn about these two twins is Esau was like the red-headed, long-haired, buff guy, worked out at the gym, hunted, chased women, wanted really nothing to do with God. On the other hand, Jacob was different. He was a mama's boy. He liked to stay home, probably liked to, watch the cooking channel or the Pioneer Woman channel on TV. Maybe he liked to just sit with Rebecca and read a good book. And Isaac probably thought that was kind of weird. And apparently Jacob kind of knew that his dad cared more for Esau than himself, which was weird because Esau was godless. He wanted nothing to do with God. He was just this total wild man. And so for Abraham's son Isaac to care more about worldly things than godly things was actually kind of shocking. And maybe Jacob felt like he was an embarrassment to his dad. But here's the problem, is that God had already told Rebecca and Isaac before the kids were even born that Esau would be the one that would serve Jacob, the younger one. And that literally was never a cultural norm. But God had completely different plans for these two boys because God had a plan for this nation, Israel. And how this would all come about would be through Jacob, the younger son. So watch what happens in Genesis 25:29. One day, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness exhausted and hungry. So Esau, the older one, said to Jacob, the younger one, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew." This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. Verse 31, "All right," Jacob replied, "but trade me your rights as the firstborn son." What an odd thing to do. But this is what the first thing that came into Jacob's mind. Verse 32 says this, "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" But Jacob said, "First, you must swear that your birthright is mine." So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all of his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left, and he showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. It's just, what an odd thing to happen. Esau comes home like starving to death, he thinks. Jacob sees this opportunity to manipulate his brother, manipulate the situation for his own gain. And he says, "Look, I'm going to give you some food, but you got to give me your birthright." And Esau does it. He gives up his birthright for food. Now, in defense of Jacob, I think he knows his brother. He knows his brother's kind of a wild man. He knows his brother doesn't care for his parents or doesn't care for God. And what Jacob should have done was gone to his knees and started praying. That's what he should have done. He should have let God handle this. But the problem is, instead of Jacob praying and asking God to step in, he takes matters into his own hands. And he says, "I'm going to get my brother's birthright any way that I possibly can." Now, I'm assuming that Rebecca, his mom, told Jacob that, when you kids were born, God made it clear that, your older brother Esau is going to serve you. But Jacob could have really honestly just trusted God to fulfill those promises for him. But there's something in us that thinks that when we need something, that God isn't paying attention. We just think, well, God doesn't really understand what I need, so I need to make this happen for him. A lot of times we think, well, he's just not moving fast enough. And so I'm just going to kind of tell a little white lie here or just try to manipulate this over here. It's like the woman who wants a baby, another baby, one last baby, and her husband's like, absolutely not. We can't afford it, we can't do it. But the woman is like, you know what, I'm going to get a baby any way I want. So she goes off the pill secretly. And so now she gets pregnant, and that's just manipulating because she wants what she wants instead of listening to her husband. We actually know a couple who did that. The husband's like, all done, no more kids. She went off the pill, and she got pregnant, and they're now divorced, and everything's a disaster in their life, all because she manipulated a situation that she should never have manipulated. This made me laugh. There was a day before Thanksgiving, there was an elderly man, and he called his son in New York, and he said, "Hey, I hate to ruin your day, but I want to tell you that your mother and I are getting a divorce." 45 years of misery, he says, is all I can take. We're sick of each other, so call your sister in Chicago and tell her. Frantic, the son called his sister and says, she's like, absolutely not, they're not getting a divorce. She says, I'll take care of this. So she called her dad immediately and said, you are not getting a divorce from my mom. Don't do a single thing until I get there. I'm calling my brother right now. We're flying in, and you don't do anything until we arrive. So the man hung up the phone and he turned to his wife and he said, okay, honey, the kids are coming for Thanksgiving and they're actually paying for their own flights. But see, that's just manipulation. And that's just what people do. We want our own way, so we try to weave things in and out and manipulate to get what we want. So that's exactly what Jacob is doing in this story. So the boys get older, and Isaac thinks he's about ready to die, so he's probably bedridden at this time. And we see this in Genesis 27, verse 1. One day when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son, and said, my son. Yes, father, Esau replied. I'm an old man now, Isaac said, and I don't know when I may die. So take your bow and quiver full of arrows and go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare my favorite dish and bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die. Now, receiving a blessing was a really, really big honor in those days. And it was kind of like something that the father would give to their son, and they would like prophesy over them and tell them like what their future would hold and what their inheritance rights would be. So when Isaac would bless Esau, it would be those kind of things, words of encouragement. But Esau wasn't supposed to get the blessing. Isaac knew that. He knew that from the beginning. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he just literally totally forgot. But Isaac should have known better. This is Abraham's son. Like, he knows that God is going to build this nation through him and his sons. But the worst part is that Isaac knew that Esau was a wild man. He knew he didn't care about God at all. Why in the world would Isaac want to give him a blessing? It made no sense. So Rebekah's wife kind of overhears this. So look at verse 5. Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, bring me some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal. Then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die. So here comes the manipulation from Rebekah. Because she's about ready to concoct this whole entire event to happen that will override her husband, and really it's just manipulation at its core. But here's my question. Why would she have to do that? Like, why wouldn't she just walk into Isaac and say, Isaac, we have to have a conversation. Like, God has already told us what to do. Like, don't you remember that? Like, why would she resort to manipulating the situation? Did she forget that God is really, really big? I always share a Montana story when it comes to manipulating, because there was a time when Rob wanted some property in Montana, and I did not want it at all. Too far away from Arizona, just didn't want it. But he was like, no, I really, really think this is a good deal. So the day we were supposed to pay for the land, I'm praying on one side of the wall because the office was on the other side, the bedroom was on my side. And I was in bed praying about this, like, God, I don't want this property, and I don't know what to do. So you have to change Rob's heart. And Rob was on the other side of the wall. And a few minutes later, he walked around. He goes, you know what? God just made it clear to me that we're not supposed to buy the land. And see, what happens is I didn't have to manipulate the situation. I didn't have to, call the land people up in Montana and create a story. Like, I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to pray. I just had to say, God, you have to change his heart because God is that big. And Rebekah should have done that. She should have said, God, you know what you need here to be done, and you're the one who has to move on Isaac's heart. And we forget that. We forget that we need to pray and let God handle what he can handle best. It's like we talked about a minute ago with, if you want a baby and your husband doesn't want one, then you guys should sit down and have a conversation about it. Like, really talk through it as a husband and wife. It's like if you want a car, don't manipulate your way to get a car. Just go in and talk to your husband. Go have a conversation and then pray and say, God, I really need a car. Would you please put this upon my husband's heart to do that. You don't need to manipulate anything. All you need to do is just pray and trust God that He will do what needs to be done. Because nothing destroys a relationship more than being lied to or manipulated. It causes such problems in marriage. But it's a reminder that on the other side, if you're a husband, and you need to be a safe place for your wife to come and talk to you. Or if you're a wife, you need to be a safe place for your husband to come and talk to you. See, I don't know what was going on in Rebecca and Isaac's marriage, but for some reason, she did not feel the freedom to talk to Isaac. I don't know why. Like maybe she talked to him before and he refused to listen, or maybe he'd get angry every time she brought it up. I don't know what she was thinking. I don't know what he was thinking. But Rebecca's going to find out soon enough. Verse 8 says, "Now my son, listen to me." Rebecca's telling Jacob this. "Do exactly as I tell you. Go out to the flocks, bring me 2 fine young goats. I'll use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies." You can imagine Jacob going, "Mom, are you joking? Like, what are you thinking?" Verse 11, "But look," Jacob replied to Rebekah, "my brother Esau, he's a hairy man, and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? He'll see that I'm trying to trick him, and then he'll curse me instead of blessing me." But his mother replied, "Then let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go out and get the goats for me." So Jacob went out and got the young goats for his mother. Rebekah took them, prepared a delicious meal just the way Isaac liked it. Then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were there in the house, and gave them to her younger son, Jacob. She covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. She gave Jacob the delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. This is an elaborate scheme of deception. It just is. Verse 18 says, "So Jacob took the food to his father and said, 'My father?' He said, 'Yes, my son,' Isaac answered. 'Who are you, Esau or Jacob?' Jacob replied, 'It's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you told me. Here's the wild game. Now sit up and eat it so you can give me your blessing.' Isaac asked, 'How did you find it so quickly, my son?' And Jacob lies. Look at this. 'The Lord your God put it in my path,' Jacob replied. He literally took his lie and said God did something that God actually did not do. Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Come closer so I can touch you and make sure that you are really Esau.' So Jacob went closer to his father, and Isaac touched him. 'The voice of Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's,' Isaac said. But he did not recognize Jacob because Jacob's hands felt hairy just like Esau's, so Isaac prepared to bless Jacob. He said, 'But are you really my son Esau?' he asked. 'Yes, I am,' Jacob replied and lied. Then Isaac said, 'Now, my son, bring me the wild game. Let me eat it, and then I will give you my blessing.' So Jacob took the food to his father, and Isaac ate it. He also drank the wine that Jacob served him. Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Please come a little closer and kiss me, my son.' So Jacob went over and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he was convinced, and he blessed his son and said, 'Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. From the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvests of grain and bountiful new wine.'" This is his blessing over Jacob that, of course, should have gone to Esau, but not really should have gone to Esau, should have gone to Jacob, but this was all manipulation. So Isaac is blessing him. "May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed." This was a profound blessing because Jacob would be the father of 12 sons. And they would be called the 12 tribes of Israel. It's like when Moses went and got the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and brought them into the land that we know of is Israel, that each of these 12 sons of Jacob would get a portion of the land. And see, this was all planned by God before any manipulation had to actually be done. See, the blessing had to go to Jacob. It had to go to him, not Esau, because that blessing was told to Isaac before the boys were even born. But the problem is that Rebekah wanted to make sure that happened. And in the way she did it, everything she did was wrong. She lied to her husband. She made her son lie to his father. And honestly, that's never what God wants. He would rather have Rebekah just gotten on her knees and just prayed and said, God, you need to stop Isaac from doing this. God, you need to step in. You need to change his heart. But instead, Rebekah just went along with this whole deceitful manipulation that she used to change Isaac's blessing. The worst part is that everyone seemed to believe that a blessing was just like magical. If Isaac blessed him, then it would just happen. But honestly, only God is the one that could bestow a blessing upon anyone. God wouldn't have honored Esau's blessing. He's like, no, I'm not honoring that. Esau's a godless kid. But for some reason in that culture, everyone thought that was such a big deal. But somehow Rebekah forgot God. And so right after Isaac blesses Jacob, Esau returns home. He finds out what just happens, and he is furious. Like, he is so angry. So what he does is he cries, and he carries on, oh, Dad, please bless me, please bless me. But it was too late. He had already blessed Jacob, and Jacob's descendants would always rule over his brothers. And Rebekah hears. She hears Esau's anger, and she understands that he's out to kill his brother Jacob. And Rebekah doesn't want that. She's like, I don't want my son to die. So what she does is she sends Jacob away about 1,000 miles away to live with her brother, because she knows that the farther away he is, Esau cannot hurt him. And that's what manipulation cost her. It cost her her beloved son, Jacob. She would never, ever see him alive again. She would die before she would ever see his face. She would die before she ever saw all of her grandchildren. So was the manipulation and the lies really worth it? And I don't think so. I think what should have happened is Rebekah should have sat down, pulled the boys in. Isaac, let's get Jacob and let's get Esau in here, and we are going to have a family meeting. And we need to talk about this. We need to explain what God had told us so many years before, that Jacob would get the blessing. I'm sorry, Esau, that's just the way it's going to work. But that didn't happen. That's how it should have happened, but it didn't. And because of that, it blew their whole family up. And Rebekah was really the loser of the situation, because she never got to see her beloved Jacob again. See, God never approves of disobedience or manipulation or deception to accomplish his purpose. He can do anything. I always say that our life is like a chessboard. If we make one chess move wrong, then he can override that. And he's that big. See, Rebekah needed to know that. She needed to be reminded of that. I think God needed Jacob at Rebekah's brother's house to marry Rachel and to have, all these different sons. So I think that part of it, God needed to get him there. But I think he could have gone there without being chased off by his brother, without being fear for his life. I think that all could have happened had they done it right. And I think had they done it right, Rebekah would have been able to go visit Jacob. She would have been able to go visit her grandchildren. But because of how she manipulated and lied, she was never blessed ever to be able to do that. There were consequences for the rest of her life because of what she did. So, bottom line, if you're thinking about doing something manipulative or deceitful, always remember this encouraging truth 52. You don't have to manipulate. You can trust God to take care of it, because he always can do what you can't do. And he really honestly is that big. So hopefully that helps you today. Have a really good day.